Let's speak with the independent statistician and the political commentator, Jamie Jenkins. Jamie, it's a pleasure to have your company. Thank you for joining us this afternoon on GB News. The scores on the doors, once again, looking pretty grim for the embattled Chancellor, Rachel Reeves.
Yeah, well, we're getting these monthly kind of figures, Martin, and as you rightly pointed out, so the monthly figures will tend to fluctuate a little bit. But I think you've got to look at the longer term trend of, say, 4 months, and we've seen basically 4 months of zero or negative growth, which isn't great. And you also got to put into the context as well that the population is obviously growing in the United Kingdom as well. So when you factor in that the population's growing, and then you look at GDP per capita, when you look at adjusting for the population growth that we're having, that if the economy is flat or shrinking and the population is expanding, that means basically living standards for everybody in the United Kingdom is falling. And that's the ultimate challenge we've got. I think you just talked a little bit about, was the budget a bit of a factor in this? It probably is. There's some talk that, people weren't worried about the budget in terms of what they were going to do, so they've held off doing things. So these figures come for October before the budget kicked in, but with the tax rises that we've seen in the budget, it's looking pretty doomy in terms of where we're going to go beyond these numbers.
And Jamie Jenkins, in terms of the political blame game, you can't keep blaming the previous regime. You can't keep blaming world affairs. Sooner or later, the buck has to stop with the Chancellor, although this week, of course, we learned from the Chancellor, she threw Keir Starmer under the bus. Perhaps this goes all the way to the top. In terms of the kinds of things that the government could do, what do you think is the way out of this? Because at the moment, we just seem to have higher taxes, more red tape, more kind of choking down of the economy, Jamie.
Yeah, so what's actually happening, Martin, is that we're seeing the private sector shrink. So what's behind this decline that we've seen today is the service sector's in decline, and the retail sector is the big driver of that decline. And we're seeing jobs lost in the retail sector. So you can then look back and think, well, the jobs tax that Rachel Reeves put in last budget is definitely biting, because we're seeing jobs going across the board in the economy, in particular retail and in hospitality. And then the other aspect of what we've got in these figures as well is that what's propping up the numbers is the borrowing that Rachel Reeves is doing to expand things in the public sector. But you can't have a public sector unless you've got a thriving private sector. So my thinking on this, Martin, is that in the short term, whilst we obviously would need to borrow a little bit more money, we've got to lower taxes, because you've got to get money into people's pockets. You've got to get businesses looking to invest. And when you get the businesses and the private sector then growing again, that money that will stimulate into the economy, and then we will start coming out of this. But we're going in the opposite direction under Rachel Reeves. Taxes are going up. I think basically we're choking any hope of growth when we go into 2026.
Jamie Jenkins, when you start plugging in another £15 billion of benefit handouts, when you start plugging in universal credit, when you start plugging in a ballooning public sector and a shrinking private sector, in your opinion, is that the recipe for growth, or is it the recipe for disaster?
I think it's more on the disaster side, because we keep putting onto that public sector debt all the time. You can't sustain that, Martin. And when you give money back into benefits, there may be some little benefit in terms of doing that, in terms of, people will have more money in their pockets and they might go out and spend it. But I think ultimately, who's the best people to decide how to spend the money? The people who are working in this country. I have more faith in people who are working and having the money in their pockets to spend it than I do in this Chancellor and the government that we've got. And putting those taxes up, remember the taxes in the recent budget haven't come in straight away. So if you think about the economic figures we've got today, those tax rises are going to hit us in the future. That's where things are going to get even more dire. So tax cuts is the only way, Martin, but I don't think they're coming anytime soon.
OK, Jamie Jenkins, thanks for joining us. As ever, a sobering picture indeed for the Chancellor. Thank you, Jamie Jenkins.